This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, again, welcome. This is Mike Downey, and I'm sitting in for Ann Rote. Ann is the chair of our Leadership Development Committee and the president-elect for Serra, and I'm the current president. Ann is recovering from double knee replacement surgery, so I agreed to kind of cover the bases for her here while she's in rehabilitation. So we're going to start with a prayer, and since I've got all you on mute, if you would just follow silently, but I'm going to use the Serra prayer for vocations. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O God, who wills not the death of a sinner, but rather that he be converted and live, grant, we beseech you, through the intercession of Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, Saint Joseph, her spouse, Saint Junipero Serra, and all the saints, an increase of laborers for your church, fellow laborers with Christ, to spend and consume themselves for souls through the same Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, thank you all for joining me again. This is Serra Treasurer Training for 2023. And I'm going to start with a little story here about the importance of the treasurer's role. We were talking about this before the call got going, but I want to tell you my story. I became a president of my club, the Des Moines Club in Iowa, when I was pretty young. I was one of the youngest members, and I sort of got roped into the job. It happened very quickly, but I had kind of a big head. I thought, president of this organization, all these people. And first thing I did is I asked the membership vice president, how many members are there in the club? And the person kind of scratched their head and said, I think it's about this, but you really ought to talk to the treasurer. They know. I said, okay. So then we had a project going on, a priest appreciation dinner, and I asked, well, how much did we charge last year, and how did we come out in the event? Did we make money, lose money, or just break even? And the people in charge of it said, I'm not sure, but you ought to talk to the treasurer about that. And then the next person I asked, I said, I heard so-and-so quit the club. And I wonder if anybody knows why. And somebody said, no, but you ought to talk to the treasurer about that. And about this time, I decided that maybe I wasn't the most important person in the club. Maybe the treasurer is, because they seem to be the people with the answers to all the questions. So, it's a funny story, but I think it's true, is that treasurers form a real key part of the infrastructure of a club. Their general responsibilities, they're usually in charge of maintaining the membership roster and the count. They learn who does quit and why first more than anybody else, because a lot of times they're trying to collect dues. And finally, when they get to the person will say, well, I can't afford it, or something else is going on, or I've moved, or something's happened. But again, they're the people that tend to know why people quit. They're also the folks that know what funds are available if we have new projects or requests or ideas. And two of the most important things that a treasurer brings to the club is a financial history of past events and being sort of an informal club archivist. And the reason for that is that treasurers tend to stay in the position for longer than the other officers in a club do. And normally we like to encourage turnover of officers on a pretty regular basis. We don't necessarily with the treasurer or with the IT person, because those two positions have some kind of unique and technical skills that not everybody has. So, but the long and the short is that they're often the go-to people to ask about, I wonder if we ever tried this. A lot of times they'll remember we did, it worked, it didn't work, here's what happened. So they become sort of the informal club archivist. It's a very important role in support of the other officers who are usually relatively new to their positions. There are three areas of primary responsibility that the treasurer has. We're going to talk about each of these as a group and individually, and then we'll take a break at the end of each one. But the first one is pretty obvious. It's financial, and it involves all the transactions, the reporting, if there's planning and budgeting or guidance in terms of what the club can afford to do. And one that we're going to talk about that's often overlooked is records retention. A second area of primary responsibility is to make sure that the annual tax filing is done to keep the club's nonprofit status. We'll spend some time on that. And then the third is the maintenance of the Serra portal, which is basically the membership list and the current list of officers and their contact information. And sometimes this function is shared with membership vice president, more often with the president of the club, but we'll talk about those. And right as we're speaking, there's a lot of changes happening in the portal, and we'll talk about that too. So those are the three areas we're going to try and cover today. Let's talk about financial functions, the transactions first. It's pretty basic. This is not, wouldn't be a surprise, I think, to most of you, but whoops, go back here. Probably one of the most important functions is collecting member dues. It's to issue the due statements and the invoices. Most clubs do that twice a year. We'll talk some about collection techniques when we get to the end here, and maybe you could share some of your experiences there. They also pay all the approved club expenses, and the major ones are usually the US and SI dues, which come due every 6 months on January 15th and July 15th. And if you're in a region that has region fees, the treasurer also pays those. Receiving and timely deposit payments and donations to the club is an important function. Reconciling the bank account and balancing the checkbook monthly is important. If you have club savings or an investment account, reporting on how that's doing is important. And finally, managing the banking relationship. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this. A lot of times the treasurer inherits a banking relationship that's been going for a long time. Technically, the whole board should approve the banking relationship annually. It's just a good idea to let people know who we're with, what the fees are, how the service has been, and to sort of approve that going forward. The second bullet here under the last one is very important. It's important that the treasurer make sure that there is always more than one authorized signer on the checking account. I'll tell you why that's so important. We had a club about 6 years ago that ran into a problem where the treasurer became just suddenly disabled, unable to do anything, actually had some dementia, and the club spent 5 months trying to get access to its funds because he was the only authorized signer on the account. So it's really important to make sure that there is more than one authorized signer. I would say in most clubs that is the president, but it doesn't have to be. There just has to be somebody else in the club who's authorized to sign on the checking account so you always have access to your funds. And finally, just keep the board apprised of banking fees, charges, and interest. There hasn't been much in terms of interest recently, but maybe that'll change a little bit. But I think it's important for the board to know about banking fees and any special charges. And that all goes back to the point of have the board approve the banking relationship on an annual basis. So that's a little bit about the financial functions. I don't think there's too much of a surprise there in anything that's on. Okay, oops. I just have this slide in here. This is the Serra International and US Serra current semi-annual dues. So this is what a club is billed every 6 months, usually in January and July. It is changing effective with the next billing cycle, which starts January 1st, 2024. The U.S. Council and the Serra International House of Delegates at the Serra International meeting in Thailand each approved a $4 increase annually for full members. On a semi-annual basis, that means that last year a full member would have cost $48. Now it's going to be $50 for a 6-month period or $100 for the year. And spouses remain the same at half of that if you're a spouse or under 25. And if you want to, there you can kind of see that you get one invoice for that from Serra International, and Serra International in turn takes a portion of that and pays the U.S. Serra Council its portion of those dues. So the idea is that the invoices come out to clubs in June and December, and the payment is expected July 15th and January 15th. Let me make sure. Okay. We'll talk about the reporting function, and we're really talking about the reports that the treasurer makes at each board meeting. Now, boards typically meet on a quarterly basis, but we have a fair number of clubs where the board meets on a monthly basis. So it just depends on the time frame you're trying to cover here. But you really want to start with a report on the income and the disbursements since the last report. And we're going to look at some examples there to show you how simple that can be. If there have been special club events like an appreciation event, usually those involve some big dollars. And I know that at least in our club, we collect an additional fee for that for the people attending, like for the dinner or a picnic or whatever it's going to be. And the treasurer will typically report the outcome of that in terms of here's how much we spent, here's how much we took in. So we broke even, we made a little profit, we had a little loss, whatever it's going to be there. And then providing the bank reconciliation, which is really part of reporting on income and disbursements. And in the, I hope you all had a chance to download the support documents that were linked to the invitation here. But we have some examples here I just want to show you. Page 2A, which it's too detailed to bring up on a screen, that's why I have the documents to review, is an example of the Serra Club of Des Moines financial report that was made at a board meeting. And I mostly wanted to show you this to show you how simple it is. You don't have to be super sophisticated to be able to do this. It's really nothing more than almost a checkbook balancing effort here. So you can see there that he starts off with what is the checkbook balance on a certain date. He puts in the receipts that have happened since then. One was the pre-depreciation event, $2,610. One was a Bishop's Burst for $7,140. We had some lunch proceeds, $20. So that added the total in the checkbook balance. And then disbursements are postage, program expense, and then payments to Serra US and Serra International. And then he also has here the pre-depreciation event that was mentioned up above. So you can see the club took in $2,610, it looks like. And the pre-depreciation event had a total cost of $2,588. So they made a very slight profit on that, which is the goal of the club usually. And then down below, we have seminarian birthdays. We usually give our seminarians $50 for their birthday each year. And that's a new fund. And I'll tell you how that's been funded, kind of interesting. And it ends up with where the checkbook balance is at the current time. So, you know, it's a pretty simple process. On the next page, page 2B and 2C, 2B, this is Jane Herrera's. She's the treasurer for the Lehigh Valley Club. She's also our region director for the Northeast, but this is how she does it. And I think this is done just on a simple Excel spreadsheet, but essentially it's the same thing. Starts with the balance forward. It goes through, instead of breaking it into deposits and disbursements, it just takes them by the times they happened, but it shows what happens to the club bank account and where the account is at the end of the period for the board to know. Just an example there, but again, it doesn't have to be super sophisticated. And then the last bullet on this slide is to report on any donations received. And this is an important function of the treasurer. Anytime you receive a donation of $250 or more, the club should issue a letter to the donor that says, thank you, we received this. And there's some magic language that goes into that letter that's good for the IRS. It lets the donor take it as a charitable expense. It basically says no goods or services were provided to the donor in return for this gift. And there is actually a copy of the letter, of a sample letter on page 2C. And you can see it's as simple as could be. It's just 2 paragraphs. The first is thanking them for their donation. And the second one, it has that language, the Serra Club of Des Moines did not provide you with any goods or services in whole or in part for this contribution. So those are important. One thing I want to emphasize is that the letter is only required for a donor in the case that they make a single donation of $250 or more. If somebody donates over the course of the year, let's say they donate $50 6 times for different events, that's $300. That none of those require a letter for the donor to take it as a charitable contribution. So the total that's given over the year is not so critical as the single donation event, how much that is. And it has to be over $250. And that's when a donor will probably expect a letter from you. Okay, any questions or comments on that? Okay, let's move on. We're going to talk about planning, budgeting, guidance as one of the areas for the treasurer's financial function. Just in terms of budgets, I thought I'd let you know that I don't think most clubs actually do an annual budget. What they do is they use the prior year's as a de facto budget. They just kind of compare how they did this year versus last year, and I think that works just fine. But if you do an annual budget, it's definitely going to take the treasurer to get involved in that process. And then treasurers often assist in financial planning for special events. Again, I mentioned that the clergy appreciation meals, a lot of times those are in some clubs, they're covered by all the dues, but in most clubs, I think that for our priest appreciation event, we actually send out an invitation and say it's $20 per person, whatever. So to set the price, a lot of times they look back at the prior year to see how they did, and they look at what the food or catering costs are going to be this year. But the treasurer is usually the one that has access to those numbers easiest of anybody on the officer team. And so they get involved in helping plan the next one, saying, you know, we lost money, we gained money, we broke even. And we have situations where we intentionally lose money. Our Sisters Appreciation Dinner in Des Moines, I think we have typically lost between $1,000 and $800 on that because there are so many sisters that come that get, you know, we buy the meals for them and we give them a gift. And there's no way that we're going to get all that covered by the meal costs that are involved. Although we'll talk about that, and you'll find out some people have been really generous to help on that. And I think there's a way to get people encouraged to do that. Another one is regional conventions. Not there are probably only a few clubs in the United States, maybe I would guess no more than 20, but there are regional conventions that take place and it rotates between different clubs that host it. Regional conventions can involve a pretty substantial inflow of cash and outflow for expense, somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 or $25,000 of both. And so the region conventions take some real planning. There's some help from the region usually, but it takes some planning there. And again, the treasurer is one of the key people on that. Although region conventions are big enough, it really takes a team of people to put together the planning for that. So those are some of the budgeting, planning, and guidance issues for club treasurers. Again, if anybody has any questions or comments, I know sometimes it takes a while to unmute and to get your comment in. Don't be afraid to just jump in and say something here, and I'll go back to the slide. But we'll move on for right now. Is there anybody else out there that wants to say something? Okay. Let's go on to the next slide then. Records retention. This is the final area of the financial functions that I want to talk about. And oftentimes this is sort of overlooked, but it's important, and it basically falls to the treasurer because the treasurer has most of the information here. And when we put this training session together, we had help from, I had help because I've never been a treasurer. I had help from 4 people. Bill Cook, who was on the training team, he's not here today. He has a prior engagement. He's with the Des Moines Club, which represents kind of a larger club. They had 125 members when Bill was the treasurer. The Lehigh Valley Club, which is Jane Herrera, and their club has about 30 members, so on the smaller side. And then Bob Campney is the current Serra International treasurer. And but Bob he was a district governor and did a lot of work for clubs in the Nebraska area as a district governor. helping a lot of them with these issues. And then finally, we have Ed Terrell, who's on today, and he is the U.S. Council Treasurer. So we've got some people that can answer questions with a little bit more finality than I can. But one of the things that we all
Excuse
agreed
me.
upon. Yeah, go
Excuse
ahead.
me. Hi, Renee Firth. And actually, you have stated twice that Jane is the treasurer of the Lehigh Valley Club. It's actually myself. I'm not
Okay.
sure if Jane is here today.
She's not.
Okay, I was just elected, so you can't throw any questions my way. But
Okay.
and we're
Well,
also known as the Serra Club of Bethlehem,
okay.
as opposed to the Serra Club of Lehigh Valley. So just
Okay.
I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
That's fine. And I should have said that Jane was the treasurer when we put this together. So,
There you go. Thanks.
okay. So the group basically talked about this. We got some legal guidance and we came up with the idea that there ought to be 5-year record retention that's recommended in general. And that would include year-end income and disbursement report, bank records, membership records, and tax filings. So keeping it back 5 years is an important function for the treasurer there. There are some places where record retention is would be expected to be longer, and one would go back to these special club events like a regional convention. For a lot of clubs, that only happens once every 8 or 9 years, but it's important to keep those records of how the event came out, what the expenses were. It's a great guide when they're sitting down to plan the next regional convention that comes up 8 years later. So again, record retention is it's an important function of the treasurer and often overlooked. Okay, that is the end of the financial functions. I would just want to add a couple of comments here. One is, sometimes people try to make this more complicated than it needs to be, and I think that the rule is keep it simple. You can almost do this function as a checkbook register. Just we've seen some examples here, a simple handwritten income and expense statement. And one thing that I do highly recommend is that at every board meeting, that the treasurer provide and pass around an exact copy of the most current bank statement. And I want to tell you why I do that. I think technically in Serra, the officers are supposed to audit the checkbook every year. The fact of the matter is nobody does it. People didn't join Serra to spend a Saturday morning going through a bunch of canceled checks and checkbook registers. So it's just not going to happen. But you can keep a pretty good feel for what's happening in the club if you know what the bank statement says is in the bank. And I'll give you an example here. About 10 years ago, we had a club where the treasurer reported that there was about $5,000 in the account. And he reported that at several meetings. And then he had a severe health episode and somebody had to jump in and take over. And they found out there was only $500 in the checking account, which was a great shock to everybody. And it turned out that the person had been borrowing from the fund for some personal reasons. The good news is that the club didn't lose any money, that the treasurer's family paid back everything that was missing. But I think that just giving some evidence of where the current funds balance is from the bank's point of view is it's a good shorthand way to audit to make sure that things make sense. So if the treasurer starts and says there's $5,000 in the account, and you look at the checkbook or the bank statement and it says 4,872, I'd think that's fine. There's variations in the timing when checks hit and when disbursements hit. But if somebody had said there was 5,000 in the account and there's only 500, it's time for the board to ask some questions. And there may be perfectly good answers to those questions, but that is a duty of the board, is to make sure that the money is being managed professionally. So just that's my advice, is just pass out a copy of the bank statement. Another way to do it would be to have the president get a copy of the bank statement as well as the treasurer. There's a lot of banks that'll send out a duplicate copy to one other person. They won't do it to everybody, but one other person. And that way somebody else knows what's going on in the funds. So some people use Excel or Quicken or QuickBooks. Again, those are good if you're a real expert on those. Maybe they help, but they make things a little less simple if somebody's going to follow on in your position. And then finally, we've had a few club treasurers who have used proprietary accounting software, which they had access to for free because of the job that they are in and the job that they retired from. And we strongly recommend against this because it's almost impossible to transfer the information to the next treasurer because they will not have access to that proprietary accounting software. So keep it simple. That's one piece of advice here. And then here's some other tips. The Des Moines Club has really gotten into the habit of encouraging members to pay annually. And I know that Serra International in the US invoice on a 6-month basis, but a lot of people like this because it saves them a hassle, and it definitely saves the treasurer a hassle of billing people twice during the year. And when you do your invoice to members, I want to go to page 4A here. I think it's if you have a chance, look at 4A with me here. This is again a sample invoice to the Des Moines Club members, and you can see there in the first paragraph it's underlined. If you want to pay for an entire year, here's what the dues are. And our dues at the time were $120 for full and $60 for a spouse. So that would include a little bit extra over the SI and US dues to help the club fund itself. And then we also ask at that time for special donations above and beyond the dues. And you can see the paragraph there that talks about the seminarian birthday fund. When we first considered this, we didn't have the funds to do this, and we decided what we would do is ask members when we invoice them if they would consider making a special donation in addition to the dues to cover the birthday fund. And it's been amazingly successful for us. If people know what they're giving to, a lot of times they're more than willing to make a donation. And you can see now, I think this is still the case, but we give each seminarian, and we have about, on average, about 15 seminarians in our diocese. We give each one a $50 check on their birthday. So, and they love it. I mean, it's just very appreciated, and it keeps them thinking about the Serra Club and to know that the Serra Club's out there working for them. So that's the top part is the invoice, and then it tells who to make the check to and where to send it. The bottom half, Bill does a great job of highlighting the prior year. You know, just reminding people of what we did accomplish with the dues that were paid. So we had a Sisters Appreciation event, we had a seminarian lunch, there was a priest appreciation event. We gave the bishop $8,000 and for the bishop's purse, and we added 20 new members. And then it's just a good idea to remind people what they get for the dues when you send out the dues invoice, because that's the time people always ask the question, what am I getting for these dues? So the third bullet here is to encourage club invitations to special events to include a donation option. And so here I'm going to go to page 4B in the support documents. And this is, again, a sample of an invitation and a sign-up sheet for people to attend a priest appreciation picnic. One of the things in paragraph 3 there, which is underlined, it says, please consider an additional donation if possible to help pay for the priest meals, because the priests aren't charged. When you get down to the bottom here, you can see there's the return portion. It has the Serran's name, and then they go through the typical things. I will be attending, my spouse will be attending, name, and then what it is for the meal costs. But at the very bottom, you can see there's a space there that for people to check that says, I am unable to attend, but have enclosed a donation in the amount of. And you would be surprised how much money we get, at least in our club, from people. And again, this goes back to the thing that I think if people know specifically what they're donating for, they're much more willing to give a donation. So don't overlook that. It's free to do. Just make sure it's on everything that you send out. And I think you'll find that it really pays for itself. Fourth bullet on this tips slide is annually encourage members to consider a bequest in their estate for the Serra Club. And I think if there's any issues there, you can actually do that through the Serra Foundation. The bequest can be made to the Serra Foundation with the stipulation that the funds go to a certain club or a certain cause, whatever it is there. So, and finally, we were talking earlier about how difficult sometimes this treasurer job is all alone, and the importance of sort of having a backup person. That's great if you can get one. But one thing that we really recommend is that the treasurer keep a key information backup notebook that has the bank account numbers, any passwords that are used, the IRS and the state websites that are used in case of need. And again, I'll give you an example here. I think it was the treasurer of the St. Petersburg, Florida club told me that their treasurer suddenly died and he had to take over, and he said he had nothing. He said he didn't know what bank was handling things, and he had passwords on the IRS account that he didn't know. He said it was just a nightmare for him to catch up. And so what he did is he created for his successor this key information backup notebook. And I think it's a great idea. The one thing is here, make sure somebody knows you have that notebook and where it can be found. That's important. And that person would typically be the president. Okay. Now that completes the all the discussions on the financial part of the treasurer's job. We're going to jump here into nonprofit status and tax filing. So let me stop here for a second and see if there's any questions about the financial functions. Just remember, you need to unmute yourself in order to ask a question or make a comment. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody asking any questions, so I'm going to plow ahead here. But again, jump in if you're having a hard time unmuting. Okay, annual tax filing status for nonprofit status, annual tax filing for nonprofit status. Start with just some basics here. Why it's important to keep the nonprofit status in your club. First of all, you have to be nonprofit so that donors can write off any contributions as charitable contributions on their personal taxes. So that's very important. The second one is it prevents the club or the members from having to pay tax on excess income over expense. This is sort of a theoretical risk, probably not a practical one, because the monies involved here are pretty small. But technically, if the IRS wanted to and you did not have nonprofit status, they could come into your club, do an audit and say, well, you had $10,000 in receipts, you had $9,000 in expenses, so you had $1,000 in income, and they could technically assign that income to each of your members in proportion. You know, so if there are 20 members, it'd be $50 each. They're not going to do that as a practical matter. Bob Campney assures me of that, but it is a technical risk, and there's no reason to take it. You just want to maintain that nonprofit status. And then finally, the third reason has to do with the SI group exemption. Most clubs use this in filing their annual tax return, and maintaining your nonprofit status helps protect the Serra International's nonprofit status too. So it's an important thing to do. Okay, so let's talk about how you do that. Basically, it comes down to this. Annually, a club has to file the correct IRS Form 990. We'll talk about what the correct form is here. It's really gotten simpler in the last year thanks to Bob Campney's work. The filing has to be made by the 15th day of the 5th month following the fiscal year end. Now, most clubs have a May 31st tax year end, so that the date that the correct 990 must be filed is by October 15th. But that depends on your tax year end. And if you have a question about what your tax year end is, I think you could call or email Bob Campney, and later on in this presentation, I've got his phone number and his email address there too. So he can tell you, he has the ability to look those things up and tell you what your tax year end is if you have a question. But He told me that overwhelmingly most clubs have a May 31st tax year end. And then just be aware that if you miss that filing date, which is the 15th day of the 5th month following the fiscal year end, the IRS can assess you $25 a day in fines. And we have had that can really mount up for a club. That's a lot of money, even if you're a week late. But we have, we've worked with the IRS. Bob Campney really has done all the work with the IRS in getting a lot of our clubs reinstated for nonprofit status, and they've been unusually good to work with there. But they made it pretty clear they're doing this. We're cleaning this up, but don't expect much of a grace period in the future here. We do expect clubs to file in a timely manner. Okay, so here's, can I skip one here? No. Okay, this is the Bob Campney's email that he sent to me. He said, don't forget to file the Form 990 and don't be late. One of the things that Bob would tell you is you have almost 5 months to file it, but there's no reason now that's become so simple that you can't do it really once you get your numbers together for the end of the year, what your gross receipts were. We had 61, we actually had 77 clubs who lost their nonprofit status. That's out of 200 clubs in the US in the last 5 years. And Bob Campney kind of single-handedly took on the project of getting all those clubs reinstated for nonprofit status. And we have almost all those corrected now. 61 clubs have been reinstated. And the 17 clubs that have not been reinstated, I think some of those have disappeared. They went out of existence. And some are clubs that just haven't responded to Bob to ask for his help, even though he's offered it. So, and then the last bullet here on this slide is important. There are sites that will contact you and ask you for a fee. They'll prepare your 990N. It is so simple. You do not need to use them. You should not pay anybody a fee if you're using the 990N, which the vast majority of clubs can now use. So that's sort of a scam. Don't use it. It's unnecessary. Okay, there were really two issues just to bring you up to date for some of those clubs, and there were a third of the clubs involved in this, but some lost their nonprofit status. And then there was a reclassification issue that affected how clubs related to the Serra International exemption. We're working almost all those out now. And like I said, all but 17 clubs are in pretty good shape on all these fronts. Okay, here's the 990N filing guidance. And this is really what Bob accomplished. Got to give the guy a lot of credit. I think he spent a man year on this project. And the calls to the IRS were unbelievable. But if a club has annual revenue, gross receipts of less than $50,000, and actually it now says if you usually have gross receipts of less than $50,000, you can file the 990N, which is a simple online postcard, electronic postcard, where basically I think you certify that your gross receipts are under $50,000. You have to have your EIN number for your club in there, and the treasurer or somebody just certifies this is the case. You hit submit and it's done. That's how easy it is. It actually could take less than 1 minute if you had your numbers in front of you. But if you have questions, Bob put together a 4-page filing guidance booklet, and that is attached in the support documents here as pages 5A through 5D. It looks more complicated than it is here, but I tell you, it's really relatively simple. I think more people have problems signing in. There's been some issues of having to change passwords, and somebody told me the IRS was asking for a picture, and he didn't have a picture. So, but anyway, if you run into problems, Bob Campney is the guy to go to, and he's been incredibly gracious with his time and helping clubs. And this slide has his email address, which is Campney Bob. For those of you that can't see this, it's CAMPNEYBOB, Campney Bob, all one word, at cox.net. and his phone number is on there too. But if you have any issues at all on your tax filing, Bob's just a great resource, and he can help you out there. Okay, this is kind of a follow-up. What happens if you do lose your nonprofit status? Well, first, you're guaranteed to lose it if you go 3 consecutive years without filing a tax return. And if you do lose it, it does cost $275 to be reinstated as nonprofit, which is another reason to keep those filings up and to do them is really don't wait till the last minute to get them done. Just do them when you got the numbers. I would say most clubs could do it within a month of the close of their fiscal year end. And again, if you do run into a problem here, Bob is an expert at getting the clubs reinstated, but it will cost the club $275 fee to be reinstated. So there again is his information. So I think that is the end of the annual IRS filing requirements. I'm going to stop here and ask if there's any questions or comments on that.
Bob, that $50,000 revenue, I assume that applies only to dues collection, not to monies raised as parts of dinners or fairs or things where we were trying to raise money for some cause.
No, it applies to all gross receipts the club had in the year.
Okay, but as a practical matter, let's say we did a benefit. I'm just making this up.
Sure.
And the benefit was an auction with donated items for silent auction and all that. And we sold tickets for that, raised $75,000.
Right.
And yet we gave away $70,000 worth of stuff. Would you say that the 75 has to go into that calculation of $50,000 max?
It does.
Huh.
Yeah, it's every dollar that the club receives in any form. Now, you know,
if I can interject,
yes.
This is Rich Layden at Kansas City in Kansas. You'd obviously then have to do the 990, probably the EZ, you'd qualify.
That's
and
correct.
There's a space in that to claim the 75,000 gross income and deduct your 70,000 that went out from that. You know, but they want gross income.
Yeah, they do. And, you know, that's a good point. Most clubs, like Bob told me, over 90% of the clubs can use the 990N now because most clubs do not have gross receipts in excess of $50,000. But there are some clubs that do. And if you do, you're probably going to have to file who is this from Kansas City again?
I'm Richard Layden, treasurer at Kansas City in Kansas.
Yeah. So as Richard said, you have to file the 990 EZ, which is, I think, about an 8-page form. It's not terribly complicated, but a lot of clubs, if they have an attorney that's a member, they'll ask the attorney to do that. If you're in a club that has a substantial investment account and a lot of assets, you may be required to just do the 990 form itself, and that is complicated. It takes a tax accountant or a tax lawyer to do it. So, but again, Campney assures me he's worked with so many clubs at this point that there are very few clubs that exceed the $50,000 gross receipts. The one issue sometimes, if a club is hosting a regional convention, and again, I realize a lot of you have never been to a regional convention, but many of you have, I hope. Those are big events, and they can typically involve $25,000 or $30,000 in gross receipts and about the same amount in expenses, but they can push the club up over the $50,000, which may have you may have to do the 990 EZ to do that. The 990 EZ is not impossible. I think most clubs had to do that before Bob got this change so that we could use the 990N, but the 990N is just so simple. It's just like grace from God in terms of dealing with the IRS. The 990 EZ, you're getting right back into all the, you know, the complications of the IRS tax code. So that good comment. Thank you, though. And it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Anybody else on IRS tax issues. Okay, let's plow ahead here. This is not an IRS tax issue, but it's sort of a tax issue that you should be aware of. A lot of clubs now are finding that they can save the sales tax on their purchases for club events by using a sales tax exemption. And, you know, it used to be sales tax was an insignificant number, but in most states now it's become a very significant number. I think it's around 7 to 7.5% on average in the United States. So you can save that if you get a sales tax exemption. Your ability to get that, we can't answer that here in this seminar because it depends on your state. Each state has different requirements. Now, Richard, did you say you're on the Kansas side or the Missouri side down there?
I'm on the Kansas side.
Okay, I know on the Missouri side, we had Homer Radford was on the Thursday call, and he said that their club has operated with the same sales tax exemption for almost 30 years. They've never had to change it or anything. We had somebody else who came on and said that every 2 years you had to reapply for the sales tax exemption. So it just depends on what state you're in and what their requirements are. Some states do not allow you to deduct money, the sales tax for food, but they will let you do it. Like if you're having a ball game with the priests and the seminarians and you buy t-shirts and hats and stuff, they will let you take that 7.5% off there. And usually the way this operates is you have the sales tax exemption number, you give it to a vendor who you're purchasing from, so they reduce the amount of the invoice they're sending you. And one creative idea, we were cautioned about this in the Thursday meeting by Bob Campney, but Dr. Ann Roth's club in Lafayette, Indiana has permission of their diocese to use the diocesan sales tax exemption number, which makes it really easy for them. Bob told me, he said he thinks that that's marginally correct. He says it's great if the diocese lets you do it, but he doesn't think most dioceses will because they're not supposed to do that. So, but it's probably worth checking. I mean, if you can do that, I don't think there's anything wrong with it if the diocese approves. Any questions on the sales tax exemption? Okay, here's another little esoteric area. Sometimes people are confused about whether their club is an association or a corporation. It's not tax related, but I think actually on the 990EZ form, you have to put in the form of the associate or the form of the group, and choices are association, trust, or corporation. Now, some clubs don't have a choice on this. I know that New York, Ohio, Florida, those require the clubs to be a corporation. So you don't have a choice there. But if you do, we recommend you take association because it typically doesn't have any follow-up reporting requirements. In most states, if you're a corporation, nonprofit or otherwise, there's an annual or biannual requirement to file a report with the state Secretary of State, not the tax people, but the Secretary of State. And there might be a minimal fee like $10 or $20. It's not a big deal, but if you fail to file it, you lose your club's in good standing status under state law. Now, nobody seems to know what significance that has. It might be something that vendors look up when they're trying to assess your request for a state tax exemption on some purchase, but nobody wants to not be in good standing. So the information is really basic. It's just the address of the corporation and a list of its officers. But the problem is that when it comes up annually or biannually, we're all volunteer organizations and we have turnover in these positions, and the mailing oftentimes goes to the person who was the treasurer 2 years ago. And that person may be completely out of the picture at this point. And what happens is that the notice never gets to the people that need it. So it's just kind of an unnecessary hassle. If you can avoid being a corporation, we recommend you do so. If you have to be a corporation, keep your eye out for this and do it. Like I said, I don't think there's any earth-shaking ramifications if you don't, but probably best is to stay in good and in clear here. So, Okay, now here's a slide that I hesitate to put up. Serra offers liability insurance for club events at no expense. They have an insurance policy that covers these. And oftentimes, if you have a club event for example, a parish where you're going to have a dinner, and especially if there's any alcohol that's going to be served, the parish will request a certificate of insurance coverage and that they be named as covered. And now a lot of the dioceses have gotten wise to the fact that if something goes wrong, the diocese can be sued too. So they're asking to be mentioned as co-insured on those things. We had one, we just had one Thursday night. John Kelly from Kokomo, Indiana, they have a annual priest seminarians ball game, and it's scheduled for next week. And he had put in for the liability insurance and hadn't heard back yet. But the stadium was basically threatening to cancel the event if they didn't have this coverage. The coverage is not terribly expensive if you had to buy it yourself. Sometimes it's between $40 and $80 usually for a single event like that. But it is free. And the things that I would recommend to you is that you start early, because these things, apparently they don't just happen. And you got to keep on top of the Chicago office once to make the request to make sure they're following through. And I know that's all a hassle. We're trying to simplify that in how the Chicago office works on this. But like I said, this John had this ball game scheduled for next Wednesday. He said, we put this in 6 weeks ago and we haven't heard a thing. Nobody's returning phone calls or emails. And so after the call, I put in a call to the executive director, John Liston, and we got it for him by the end of the day yesterday. So, but you shouldn't have to do that, but you do. I'm just telling you that it's there's a little bit of a hassle here, and but it is at no cost. And if you run into that requirement, realize that it's available. And if you run into any real problems getting it done, be sure you follow through to watch that it is done. Give me a call. And one of the advantages of being a big mucky muck in Serra is that I can sometimes make things happen quicker than other people can. Anyway, be aware it exists. It's a benefit of being, it's a benefit of your dues in Serra. Now we're going to shift over to the membership management role that treasurers play. Not all treasurers play this role. In some clubs, the membership vice president or the president handles this, but I would say in the majority of clubs, the treasurer does, because the update usually happens at a time to make sure you get an accurate invoice on the 6-month basis from the Serra International office. We are in the process as we speak of changing over our membership management software. For those of you that have been treasurers, you know we had this thing called the portal. A lot of us were not very satisfied with how well it worked. And about 1.5 years ago, the software people notified us that the software was end of lifing, even though it had just become, after 6 years, finally usable. And they wanted us to sign up to do a whole new project that would have cost $300,000. And basically, we had a team that went out and looked, and we are shifting over to a company called Club Express using their software. The company we'd used before, we were the only nonprofit that they had. This group, Club Express, represents over 1,000 nonprofits from incredibly small to incredibly large. And we're shifting the database over as we speak from the old one to the new one here. So you're going to run into a time probably in the next couple of weeks when you go to sign on and you can't get anything because the old one is down and the new one isn't up yet. So there's going to be a period of time when just ask your patience. But I think in the end, these people have had a tremendous reviews from their customers in terms of ease of use. And there's some other benefits too that we'll talk about down the road for communications. But for right now, the only big change that we can see is it used to be that any officer in a club could make changes to the membership list or to the officers list, any listed officer. That will no longer be true, and clubs will have to designate people with administrative authority, and usually it will be only 1 or 2 people. I would recommend that it be the treasurer and the president, but it can be anybody in the club who can make changes to the membership and officer list. So that's one change that is going to happen here. And if you have any questions, if you need information, you can't get it from the portal because it's down, the Chicago office has a hard copy of everything that was in the portal at this point, and they will help you get through whatever problem you've got. Okay.
Mike,
Yes.
hey, Mike, this is Tom Russell from the Serra Club of Omaha. And
Tom?
I was trying to get in the portal this morning and it's not available. I don't know if that's a planned outage or.
No, it's down. It's down now because I think we've pulled the data and we're rolling it over into Club Express.
Okay, so there will be no access from now until Club Express is available?
That's true, but there's still, if you want to access the information, you can call the Chicago office. They have a hard copy of everything.
Okay.
If you're trying to do something, but if you can wait a couple of weeks here, I think we're going to be up with the Club Express software.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for the update.
Okay. Anybody else on that? It's going to take some patience here, folks. No transfer like this of data processing happens without some glitches. But I think in a year we're going to be so happy. And this was 1/3 the cost of what the other guys were proposing. Very reasonable, and they're just very professional. One of the other advantages we're going to have in the past, if you had problems with the portal, you had to contact the Chicago office. One of the things with Club Express is that they have a direct 800 number that is active during normal business hours in the Chicago time zone, where they can help you individually. So it won't just be the club you can go to. You can actually go to them too as part of our arrangement with them. Did somebody have a question there? I'm looking at a picture of a group of people. You'll need to unmute if you do have a question or a comment. There we go.
It's McAllen, Texas. I'm sorry, it's because we had to turn on our phone because our laptop is not, we're having problems with the audio.
Okay, good enough. Any other questions or comments about this? It's a big deal, but I think once we get through it, everybody's going to be really happy. I know I am already. Okay, we're going to finish up here with a discussion on collections. Collections is probably the least fun part of being the treasurer. And I'm going to give you some approaches here. I wish Bill Cook had been on, but he had a commitment for today. But on page 7A of the support documents, I had Bill, and the top of the page is an email from him, just given his process that he goes through on dues collection. When Bill started in 2004, a lot of people didn't have emails, so all of our invoices were by hard copy mail, and that was a pain. Now we have only 12 members out of 150 that don't have email. So we still mail them a hard copy invoice, but everything else is done by email. And basically his approach, you can see it there, but you always have a handful of people that don't respond after you sent them 3 emails. He sends them an email in the mail, just in case they've changed their email address or something. And if that doesn't happen, if nothing happens from that, then he looks for friends that person has in the club and asks them to remind the member to send the dues. And then finally, I think he said after the 4th step there, he gets on the phone to try and contact them. And he said if he gets to the next billing cycle, a lot of times what he'll do is he'll call those people and say, hey, the bill's coming up for the next 6 months. And I don't know if you knew it, but you didn't pay your bill for the last 6 months. And he says a lot of times people will pay at that point, both for the last 6 months and the next 6 months. You know, it's important to know we're a nonprofit organization and we have some flexibility there. Bill gave an example of one of our members who he called, and she basically said, this was during the pandemic. She said, you know, I had 2 part-time jobs and I've lost them both because I just can't afford to pay the dues right now. But if this was in June or April, but she said, if you could wait till December, I should be able to pay the back dues and the dues to come. And Bill said, that's okay, we'll cover you. And they did, and she did, and the club was just fine. So there's a little bit of flexibility in how you handle this. I think that the art here is to be persistent but polite. That's the best way I can put it. If Bill were on here, you'd know Bill is that he's the gentlest guy, but he is the most persistent guy. We call him Guido in our club because he's so effective at collecting dues. But anyway, that's just one process. And then down at the bottom of that same page 7A, I want to make you aware of some things that different clubs are doing. Now, was it Renee that was on here that took over for Jane? But Jane, when she was treasurer, they started a pay as you're able dues collection, which is kind of interesting. The invoice that they sent out was actually on page 7B. And basically, they say that the primary members are recommended to pay $80, spouses under 35, $40. But their comment to members is, we'd like you to pay what you can, because some members can't afford to pay that, other members can afford to pay more. And I don't know if Renee could get back on and confirm this for me, but Jane told me that so far when she had been there, I haven't talked to Jane probably since the treasurer's training last year on this. She said that the club has come out ahead, that actually a few people couldn't pay the full amount, but enough people paid more that they actually got more than they would have if they just set flat dues and said, this is what you got to pay. It's a courageous sort of approach to it. Probably not so sure every 6 months what you're going to get, but it seems to be working for them. And you can see a letter that goes with that on 7C. Yes, is that Renee?
Yes, it is, Mike. Thank you. That is in fact true in regards to the dues that were just collected here in June. Jane had still sent out that email to everyone. And then I just did a follow-up because there were quite a few people that had not paid. So I just used the scenario of being the new kid on the block and pretending as if I didn't know, how it works. So I was able to collect more dues that way also. She had taken some people off, and I actually physically called them so that I could verbally talk to them, because I find that if you use email, it's very easy to ignore email, and people are so busy and everything. So I find with a phone call, if they take the phone call, I just find that to be easier, and that will be my second, as far as sending the email first.
Right.
And then possibly I'll send it again, but my third one will be, I'll make that phone call.
Right. You hardly ever can avoid with some members making a phone call. And a lot of times you find out they haven't been getting it, or they haven't been looking for it, or their computer's down, or whatever the reason is. But yeah, it's worthwhile. But the more you can winnow the number down, the easier it is, because you got fewer phone calls to make there. So,
True.
But I think your approach is very interesting.
It is true that people do pay more than what is asked of them, but like you said, then you can't rely on those numbers coming in, because we also can't rely on these people to continue to pay above and beyond. So, and our group has gotten much smaller. We are actually down to I think like 18, maybe 20 active. So that's where we are now.
Great. Thank you, Renee. I think somebody might have had a question for either you or me. Who was that? Okay, maybe we lost it, or maybe we answered the question. Who knows? Okay. But anyway, I just think it's the least fun part of being a treasurer, but it's a really important function there. Let's go on here. This is just a slide that shows you I want to let you know that the membership, missionaries membership contest has been renewed for the coming year. It's already started as of your club counts on July 1st for membership, and it's going to be structured exactly the same way this year. So for large clubs, those are 25 or more. There's a first, second, and third place cash award, and that's based on the net new members in the clubs. It's not a percentage, it's just the net new members who has the most. Same for small clubs. The 10% dues rebate for the following year will be granted if there is more than a 10% gain in membership. So a club that had only 10 members would get a dues rebate if they could add 2 members. So it's a little bit, we changed that so that it was a little bit easier for smaller clubs to accomplish and participate in this. Any club that has a net gain of 5 or more members gets a free Serra International or Rally registration. So that benefit continues. And just to clarify, not that anybody on here is in this situation because you're all clubs that exist already, but we had an issue this year. We had 6 new clubs start up. We didn't know exactly how to treat them in terms of their beginning count. And what we did is we used an arbitrary number of 25, since a new club startup requires a minimum of 25, and then they were judged based on their gain over 25 when the year end came, and that'll be the same thing this year. And again, all clubs are going to have to register in advance. Believe it or not, we had 2 clubs, I think, that did not register after substantial efforts to get people to do it. It only takes 30 seconds on the serraus.org website, and but they would have qualified for one of the benefits, but they didn't register, and so they're not there. People have asked me why we do that. I think part of it is we just like to know that people have some skin in the game, that you're willing to just say in advance, I'm aware of the rules, we're going to try and do something. But the truth of the matter is, it also helps us to make sure that when you register, you assign a person who's the contact. And a lot of times we have difficulty that the information in the portal is inaccurate. And so this lets us know that we are sending something to somebody that is in charge this year of that function. And it also lets us know that the club knows that the contest exists. So those are some of the thoughts there. The rest of this, there's some other useful forms and documents that I've just included. Page 8A is the new member application form. They keep making this a little bit better, but there's still problems with it, in my opinion. But one thing I want to comment on page 8A is that the very bottom of the new member application form says new member fee $11.75. That's the initiation fee. But a lot of clubs change that number because that's just for Serra International and Serra US. If they want to get somebody involved in coming to meal events and so forth, they may do an approximation of what the meal cost would be and would change that number for a person to include that so they could start right away. You might want to do that. There's a club transfer form that's very rarely used, but that's where a Serra Club member moves from one club area to another club area, and it's just used to transfer that person over. I see on looking at it, there's still a lot of stuff there that's doesn't apply anymore, but just be aware the form exists. It'd also be easy to do by calling Chicago and having them do it. And then finally, pages 8C and 8D are sort of a summarized position description for the club treasurer that has the basics of what we've gone through in the session today. So that pretty much concludes things. I'm going to finish with a prayer that I composed for treasurers because I had such compassion for them. So this is strictly my own, and you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but I like it because I think it summarizes sort of the key things that treasurers do for a club. So here's the prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, grant me the grace to be a good steward of my club's financial resources, patient and understanding, yet persistent in collecting dues from our members, timely and accurate in making deposits and paying approved expenses, helpful with financial guidance to make future club events successful, gracious in accepting financial gifts to our club, and joy-filled by the knowledge that my work, especially the most tedious and detailed, is indispensable to the success of my club in achieving the Serra mission. Amen. Okay, I'm going to stay on here, but let's see if there's any questions first. Just want to thank you all for being treasurers, for being Serrans, and for everything that you do. Again, this is a harder job than a lot of jobs in Serra, and your willingness to do it is really appreciated by not just me, but I tell you, the members of your club. So, are there questions or comments anybody has?
Thank you, Mike, for taking the time to present this today.
Sure. Like I said, I really enjoy the training part of my work at Serra. So,
Mike, thank you for doing this today.
you bet.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Renee. Nice to
Thank
meet
you, Renee.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks, Ed.